Joining us, staff writer at The Atlantic and MS Now political analyst Ashley Parker, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, and ProPublica reporter Jen Fifield. She covers voting, elections, and democracy. I want to start with politics here, and Ashley, I'm going to start with you. When Mike Flood says he just wants voter ID, he thinks Americans want voter ID, he's not wrong. The majority of the public does think that voter ID is not a bad idea. That's what the polling says, yes. The issue here, and I think we need to separate those two, is that the justification the Republicans are now using for voter ID, the one they're using today and have been using now for a few years, is that Donald Trump lost the election because of fraudulent voting. Mike Flood can say he's not a 2020 denier, but the party itself is saying Donald Trump won, or it was shady in some way, and we got to look into it. And there are all these crazy reports of fraudulent votes and non-citizens voting or dead people voting. They are using that without evidence to push for voter ID. And by the way, a whole lot more.
Right. Well, as you just laid out, the reason people now do not trust our elections is because going back, Katie, to 2016, Donald Trump has sowed doubt and distrust in our electoral system, with his main argument being, when I win, it's free and fair, and when I don't, it's rigged. And I will add, obviously, of course, sort of the best example of that is 2020, where he refused to accept the results of a free and fair election. But Katie, you and I covered him in his 2016 campaign, where he beat Hillary Clinton fair and square. By the way, the United States measures votes. But because he did not beat her by the large margin he had hoped to, he still began to say and claim falsely that the election was somehow rigged. So this has been going on for over a decade, mainly because of one person.
Actually, it's even worse than that. Early on in that evening, if you'll remember, before the tide started turning toward him, before he won Florida, he was already ceding the ground to claim that the election was rigged on election night, before it became clear that he would win. And in the months before that, he was going on and on about a global conspiracy to take him out of office, to keep him from office, and to make sure that he did not win the election. So, yeah, we want to talk about it, really coming to a crescendo in 2020, but he was already starting to do it back then. And Jenny really gives away the plot here. What is remarkable about Donald Trump are the things he says out loud. And you want to say, oh, he's joking. He's not joking. If I win, it's free and fair, as Ashley said. And if I lose, it's rigged. So he's being very clear to everybody who's listening that no matter what happens, if he doesn't like the outcome, regardless of whether it was fair, he is going to call it unfair, and he's going to claim it's rigged. The discussion we're going to have today, or we're having right now, is about what he's going to do next. So lay out what your reporting shows about how this Department of Justice is potentially laying the groundwork for claiming the next results are rigged.
Well, we started seeing yesterday that the Department of Justice is sending letters to election officials saying, you better clean your voter rolls of non-citizens, or else we will prosecute you. To back it up a little, these are the county clerks that are probably processing your tax records. In most cases, they're not elected. They're not political folks. They're people that are running the day-to-day of county operations. And he's saying, you need to ensure that there's no non-citizens on the voter rolls, or we're going to come after you in particular. And this is an escalation of what we've seen over the last 18 months, with Trump trying to desperately prove his claim that there's widespread non-citizen voting, and a lot of frustration internally in the administration that hasn't happened.
So what's the intention here? If these people are not elected and they're just sometimes volunteers, or this is their day job, by telling them that they will individually be prosecuted if a non-citizen is voting, can you tell me what the administration is trying to do, or the message it's trying to send to these individuals?
Well, I spoke to the election officials who received these messages yesterday, and they felt it was just another intimidation tactic to try to scare them to change some sort of procedures about how they do things. Their response is, we are following the law. We know that we're doing a good job in making sure that the eligible voters can vote and people that are ineligible cannot vote. And so they see it as just smoke and mirrors, while other election attorneys that I've spoken to say, this might actually escalate into attempts to prosecute.
If they intimidate people into, quitting their jobs and not doing this or not volunteering, does the administration, from your reporting, see an opening to potentially meddle themselves?
Well, I think that we see already a lot of attrition across the country for election officials who are tired of being harassed and intimidated, who have decided not to do this career any longer. And then we see mistakes coming from elections from the new folks in office who are trying to do their best to administer really complicated elections. And then we see those errors being used as, again, a talking point as how our elections aren't fair. So it's a big cycle, and it's been, like you have outlined, it's been going on for years now, and this is just more of the same.
All right, so Lisa, can they be individually prosecuted?
It depends on what they're being prosecuted for, but I don't think that the end goal here is prosecution. The end goal is what Jen just outlined, which is to intimidate people into doing maybe a more aggressive weeding of voter rolls under federal law than they otherwise might. So let me just take a step back and say there are 3 federal laws here that the Department of Justice is citing. And there are 2. One was passed in 1993, another in 2002, that require state election officials to sort of weed their state registration list to make sure that there's nobody ineligible on their lists. Then there's another law that says you have to maintain a single uniform voter registration list from state to state that assigns, among other things, every voter has a unique voter registration number or identifier. That was the basis on which they went out and demanded of all different states, you must turn over your voter registration lists to us. And they have ended up in litigation with various states, over 30 of, I believe 30 of them right now. They have lost 11 times. It's in the wake of that loss, being unable to access the voter registration lists themselves, that they have now taken this new tactic that Jen was outlining, going to state and local election officials and saying, well, if we can't get your voter lists ourselves, now we're going to tell you if you don't take people off them that shouldn't be on them, we'll prosecute you.
So I guess the question I have now, Ashley, is that how much of a team, how devoted, dedicated is this Department of Justice to finding ways to intimidate or manipulate or change or prosecute their way into a result they want? And if they can't get that, then at least casting enough doubt on the process to give them an advantage in 2026 or 2028.
Well, just taking the casting enough doubt, it creates the groundwork for someone who doesn't like the results of an election to claim it was rigged. That's the first thing. And then, when you talk about that you are worried about non-citizens voting, that also gives the administration the cover to say, put ICE agents outside of every polling station, which is something Democratic operatives and election officials writ large. It is one of their biggest fears that comes up unprompted when I speak to them. Every Democratic member of Congress I've talked to just mentions this on their own. So it certainly gets it into the ether that there is something nefarious going on. And to answer your first question, this is a Department of Justice that very much by design is singularly focused on pleasing Donald Trump and doing his bidding. And this is one of the areas he cares most about. We haven't talked about this yet, but the SAVE Act, it has caused him to defy Republicans in Congress, to not sign bipartisan housing legislation, again, is focused on making it harder to vote. This is what he cares about, and the people who are loyal to him understand this is what he cares about and are prepared to do his bidding.